The world of power, wealth, and violence had always been cold, but tonight it turned frozen. In the midst of a sprawling, dimly lit mansion, the sound of a gunshot shattered the silence. The figure of the most feared kingpin in the world of crime lay lifeless in a pool of blood. His death was swift, efficient, but the ripples of chaos it would cause would be far from immediate. A bloodied hand reached for a phone, fingers trembling as the final message was typed out. "It's done. The king is dead." The message sent, the hand fell, motionless. A figure watched from the shadows, ensuring that the deed was done, but the question remained: who had orchestrated this death? Was it revenge, or had the real mastermind waited patiently for this moment to seize control? The camera lingered on the cold, empty room, the aftermath of betrayal about to unfold. Sebastian stared at the blood-stained message on his phone. His heart raced in his chest, 1,000 thoughts colliding in his mind, but he couldn't focus on any of them. This wasn't just the death of a kingpin. It was the unraveling of a life he had been trying to escape. The Mafia was never meant to be his life. It was meant to be a dark past he had locked away, a past he thought he'd left behind. But with this single message, everything changed. The walls around him were closing in, and he knew that his next steps could either lead him back into the underworld or to his final escape. But at what cost? The blood of the innocent had already stained his hands. How much more would be spilled before he could stop it? Sebastian met with his old ally, a man named Lucas, who had long since escaped the chains of the Mafia world. Their eyes locked in a silent exchange of distrust before Lucas spoke. "You're back in this mess, Sebastian. You thought you could escape, but you've just stepped right back into it." Sebastian's lips tightened. "I didn't come here for your judgment. I came for answers." Lucas's grin was cynical, but there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes: fear. "And you think I can give you that? Answers won't help you now. This game you're playing, it's bigger than you think." Sebastian's past was more than just bloodshed. It was an endless cycle of violence that had shaped him into what he was today. He had been a soldier, a trusted enforcer, and yet none of it had prepared him for the depth of the betrayal he was about to uncover. Every ally he once had seemed to be working for the very enemy he had sworn to take down. The Mafia, once his family, was now a web of lies. And in the center of it all was someone he had never suspected, the one person he had trusted the most. Sebastian stood in front of the old crumbling warehouse, the place where everything had started. His breath caught in his throat as the memories flooded back, every deal, every betrayal. The air was thick with tension, and he knew that the answers he sought were inside. But entering this place would mean crossing a line he wasn't sure he could ever come back from. But there was no turning back now. It was time to face the truth, no matter what it cost him. Sebastian sat at a dimly lit table in an underground bar, the air thick with smoke and tension. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that didn't make sense. Kingpin's death had only set off a chain reaction, and now everyone was scrambling for power. The Mafia world was shifting, and everyone had their own agenda. The betrayal he had felt was still fresh, but now deeper secrets were starting to reveal themselves. He had been too focused on revenge, forgetting the larger game being played. "There's something bigger at play, isn't there?" Sebastian muttered, his voice tinged with realization. The figure across from him, Lucas, gave a cold, calculating smile. "You're starting to catch up." The next morning, Sebastian stood in front of a shattered window, the city below him buzzing with light. His thoughts were clouded, a storm of suspicion and distrust swirling in his mind. The allies he once trusted seemed less reliable by the minute. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone he had known for years had played him from the start. As the realization hit, so did the urge for action. He couldn't stay passive anymore. The Mafia world had always been about power and control, but now it was about survival. "I have to find the truth," Sebastian whispered to himself, determination settling in. The tension was palpable as Sebastian met with an old rival, Marcus. Marcus had always been a thorn in his side, but now he was the key to understanding what was really going on. You think I'm just going to hand you the keys to this kingdom? Marcus smirked, clearly amused by the idea. Sebastian didn't flinch. I don't need your keys, Marcus. I need the truth. Everything we've built is about to crumble, and if you want to survive, you'll help me take it down from the inside. Marcus's smile faded, and for the first time in years, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more twisted than Sebastian had imagined. A deeper conspiracy was at work, and it wasn't just about the Mafia anymore. Global cartels, politicians, and elites were all intertwined in this web. It was a dangerous game, one where survival meant betraying those closest to you. The more Sebastian uncovered, the more questions arose. You were in over your head, Sebastian, Lucas' voice echoed in his mind. But the truth was out there, and he couldn't back down now. Sebastian's phone buzzed, and he hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was familiar but distant, filled with authority. You're digging too deep, Sebastian. Walk away now or there will be consequences. His heart raced, but he stayed calm. You think I'm afraid? I've been living in this hell for too long. You want to stop me? You'll have to come for me. The call ended abruptly, but Sebastian didn't feel fear. He felt something else. Empowerment. He wasn't running anymore. The walls were closing in, but he was ready to break through. Sebastian's world cracked wide open when he discovered the true depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just the family he had once trusted. It was his own blood. His brother, the one person he had always believed in, had been orchestrating the downfall of everything they had built. It felt like the earth beneath him had collapsed. You should have known, Sebastian, Lucas's voice echoed in his mind. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. What? Nothing was sacred anymore. The truth was now a weapon, and Sebastian was its target. Sebastian confronted his brother in an abandoned warehouse, the air thick with tension. Why Marco? Sebastian's voice cracked with emotion. Marco, his older brother, stood tall and unmoving, his face a mask of cold indifference. You were always too weak, Marco said flatly. I had to take control before everything we built crumbled under your mistakes. Every word felt like a knife to Sebastian's heart, but he refused to back down. You sold your soul for power, Sebastian spat, and you'll pay for it. The confrontation left Sebastian shattered, but it wasn't over. Marco's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. As Sebastian dug deeper, he uncovered that the entire syndicate was under the influence of a hidden third party, someone even more powerful than Marco. It was no longer about family or loyalty. It was a war for control of everything. You're already too late, a mysterious voice whispered on the other end of the phone. The real game begins now. Fear and urgency gripped Sebastian's heart as he realized the true scale of the enemy. Sebastian's pursuit of the truth led him into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, he realized that his quest for vengeance had blinded him to a far greater conspiracy. Global politicians, international cartels, they were all playing a part in the downfall of everything he had ever known. The question now was whether he could expose the truth without becoming a casualty himself. It's too late to back out now, Sebastian muttered, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Sebastian finally confronted the mastermind behind it all, in an isolated mansion hidden away in the mountains. The final confrontation was about to unfold. You knew it was always going to end like this, the figure said, stepping out of the shadows. You've been a pawn in a game that was never yours to win. Sebastian's fists clenched. Then, why not finish it? He demanded. The figure smiled coldly. Because you still have one choice left. Fight or die. With those words, the battle for survival began, and there would be no turning back. Sebastian stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping through his hair as he stared out at the vast expanse of the city below. The decision was no longer his own. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The war was personal now, and every move he made was more dangerous than the last. Marco's betrayal had set everything into motion. And now, the hidden mastermind was tightening their grip. I thought I could control this, Sebastian muttered to himself. but I'm just another pawn in their game. He clenched his fists, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. If he was going to survive this, he would have to fight. But the real question was, what was he willing to sacrifice? Sebastian's confrontation with Marco was inevitable. It was supposed to be just another battle, another test of loyalty. But when they met in the underground garage, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. I should have known better than to trust you, Marco sneered. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. I trusted you with everything, and you betrayed me. The air was thick with the sound of engines and distant chatter, but neither of them moved. You didn't see the bigger picture, Sebastian, Marco said coldly. I'm doing what needs to be done. Sebastian's voice dropped to a growl. And that's why you'll fall, Marco. You lost sight of everything we stood for. As Sebastian continued to unravel the conspiracy, he found himself trapped in a world where loyalty had no meaning, and trust was a commodity to be bought and sold. His search led him to an abandoned hotel on the outskirts of the city, where he believed the answers to his questions lay hidden. They've been playing us all along, he muttered to himself. Inside, the silence was deafening, the air thick with dust and decay. The walls, once elegant, were now a reflection of his life, broken, abandoned, and filled with ghosts of the past. As he made his way through the hotel, he felt the weight of betrayal closing in. It was time to end this. Inside the hotel, Sebastian found himself face to face with the puppet master, the man who had been pulling the strings all along. The figure was calm, almost amused by Sebastian's anger. You think you can stop this, don't you? The man said, his voice smooth and cold. You've always been the pawn, Sebastian. You were never meant to be anything more. The weight of those words hit hard. For years he had believed he was part of something greater, but now he saw that everything had been a lie. I'm done being your pawn, Sebastian replied, the resolve in his voice stronger than ever. The game was over, and now it was time for a reckoning. Sebastian's confrontation with the mastermind was only the beginning of the end. As he made his final move, he realized the true cost of his actions. There would be no easy way out. His choices had led him to this moment, and there was no going back. This is the only way, he whispered to himself, his mind made up. The last part of the puzzle clicked into place, and with it, a plan that would change everything. The battle for control had been won, but at what cost? As he walked away from the wreckage of the past, Sebastian understood that survival didn't come without sacrifice. The final confrontation loomed closer, but Sebastian was prepared. The last pieces had fallen into place, revealing the identity of the mastermind behind everything. He stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building, his gaze fixed on the city below. This ends tonight, he muttered, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The empire that had once controlled everything was now crumbling, and Sebastian was the one to bring it to its knees. He had lost everything in this war. Family, trust, even his own identity. But at the end of it all, he was determined to see the truth exposed, no matter the cost. There's no turning back now, he whispered, ready to face whatever awaited him in the shadows. Sebastian's heart raced as he walked into the meeting room, the final showdown about to unfold. The figure seated at the head of the table looked up with a cold smile, his identity now fully revealed. I knew you would come for me, Sebastian, the figure said. But you're too late. The empire is already mine. Sebastian's breath was steady, but his mind was sharp. It's over, he replied, his voice unwavering. The room was filled with the scent of danger, and as the clock ticked down, Sebastian realized that every step had led him to this point. We'll see about that, he said, knowing the time for words had ended. The standoff escalated quickly. Words were no longer enough to bridge the gap between them. The mastermind, once a figure of power, now seemed fragile in the face of Sebastian's resolve. You don't understand, the man said, his voice cracking. You were never meant to be part of this. I made you. Sebastian's eyes burned with fury. You didn't make me. You broke me, he retorted. But now I'll finish what you started. The weight of the moment hung in the air, and as the two locked eyes, it was clear that one of them wouldn't walk away from this encounter. As the standoff continued, Sebastian realized that there was no more room for negotiation. This wasn't about power, money, or survival anymore. It was about righting the wrongs of the past and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to the Empire's control. The mastermind had underestimated him at every turn, but now the tables had turned. "You think you've won?" the figure asked, his voice bitter. "No," Sebastian answered quietly, his voice steady. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to end this." As he stepped forward, the finality of his words settled over the room like a storm ready to break. The final shot was fired, and the Empire began to fall. Sebastian didn't flinch as the room erupted in chaos. The figure collapsed, the weight of his years of manipulation finally catching up to him. Sebastian stood over him, breathing heavily, but his eyes were clear. "It's over," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The city outside was silent now, the chaos of the past few days finally starting to settle. As he looked out over the skyline, Sebastian felt the final weight lift from his shoulders. The war was over, but the scars would remain. What was left for him now? Only survival, and the heavy burden of knowing that sometimes, even victory comes with a price. Sebastian's mind raced as he left the remnants of the Empire behind him. The air was thick with the stench of betrayal, but he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. What was the point of all this? He had exposed the truth, but at what cost? "I destroyed everything," he whispered under his breath, standing at the edge of the city. The Empire was gone, and yet it didn't feel like a victory. Every relationship he had was now fractured, including the one with himself. He had gained power, but lost his soul. The truth had been exposed, but in doing so, Sebastian had become the very thing he had fought against. There was no redemption left. Only survival. As Sebastian descended into the depths of his mind, the memories of everything he had done played on repeat. He had burned bridges with everyone who mattered, even those who had stood by him when the world seemed against him. Was it worth it? He asked, but the answer was lost in the wind. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the embers illuminating his face in the darkened alley. The truth felt like a prison, one that had shackled him to a life he no longer recognized. "Maybe I was never meant for peace," he murmured, inhaling deeply. The man he once was lost, and now there was only the monster he had become. A knock on the door jolted Sebastian from his thoughts. The person standing before him was an unexpected figure, Lucas. "You're still alive," Sebastian said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Lucas's smirk was all too familiar. "Surprised?" he replied. "You didn't think I'd leave you to finish this alone, did you?" The truth about their shared past finally began to sink in. Lucas had always been a shadow, lurking in the background, but now he was a part of the final act. "We've both crossed lines, Sebastian," Lucas said, his tone serious now. "But this doesn't have to be the end." In the dim light of a rundown bar, Sebastian and Lucas sat across from each other, the weight of their shared past between them. "You're still trying to fix things," Lucas observed, his voice low. "But what's broken can't be fixed, not this time." Sebastian's eyes darkened, the pain of the truth beginning to settle in. "I don't want to fix it," he replied quietly. "I want to survive." The conversation between them shifted from shared history to a bitter reality, one where redemption wasn't possible, and the only choice was to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. "If you want to keep breathing, we do this my way," Lucas added, a cold edge in his tone. Sebastian's thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash from the alley behind the bar. He turned instinctively, the weight of his past decisions hanging over him. As he stepped outside, a figure emerged from the shadows, a former ally, now turned enemy. "Did you think you could walk away?" the figure sneered, gun in hand. Sebastian's heart pounded as he faced the last vestiges of the war he had started. "I didn't come here for a fight," he said, his voice steady but filled with the remnants of fear. The final showdown was inevitable, and now Sebastian was caught between survival and the desire to end the nightmare. "It ends tonight," he muttered, drawing his own weapon. The rain fell in sheets, a constant barrage against the broken streets below. Sebastian stood in the rain, facing the figure who had once been his ally, now his greatest enemy. The city around them seemed to echo with the weight of their confrontation. "I never wanted this," Sebastian said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I didn't ask for this war, this betrayal. But now, it's too late to walk away." His heart was heavy, the cost of his decisions finally sinking in. "I tried to stop it. I tried to bring justice. But all I've done is destroy everything." His gaze met the figure's eyes, his own filled with a raw, painful truth. "I'm not the man I was, but I've got one last fight left in me. It ends tonight." The wind howled around them, but Sebastian stood firm, ready for whatever was coming next. The end was inevitable, but the price was something he had already paid long ago. Sebastian's breath came in ragged gasps, each step he took heavier than the last. The final battle had begun, but he knew that winning would cost him everything. The memories of his past decisions, the faces of those he had hurt, all came crashing down on him. He wasn't the hero in this story. He never had been. "I can't change what I've done," he muttered to himself, eyes fixed on the darkened horizon. "But I can end it." As he neared the building that had once been the heart of the empire, his steps slowed. He could feel the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. He had been a soldier in this war for too long, and now, all that was left was the choice to finish it. His hand reached for the door handle, each movement deliberate, like the final step toward redemption, or damnation. "This is it," he said, under his breath, knowing that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Inside the building, Sebastian faced the mastermind behind the entire empire, the person who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. The figure stood in the center of the room, bathed in dim light, a smug smile playing on his lips. "You're too late," the figure said, his voice calm, almost patronizing. "You've destroyed everything, but it doesn't matter. It was never about you." Sebastian's heart raced, the betrayal and rage surging to the surface. "You never understood," he said, his voice tight. "It wasn't about me. It was about everything you took from us." The figure's smile faltered for a moment, but only for a moment. "You're nothing but a pawn in a game you'll never win." Sebastian's hand tightened around the gun, the weight of the decision now pressing down on him. "Then let's end the game," he said coldly, stepping forward. The final confrontation was brutal. Words were no longer enough. Sebastian's heart pounded in his chest as the gunfire echoed through the room, each shot more deafening than the last. He fought not only for survival, but for the redemption he had been seeking. "This ends now," he yelled, the weight of his words carrying through the chaos. But even as he pressed forward, he could feel the truth of what he had become, the man he had been. Every choice, every action had led him here. And now, there was no way out. The smoke filled the air, the sound of battle deafening. But in that moment, Sebastian understood. The war was over. There would be no victor, no hero, just a world left in ruins. And all that remained was him, surviving, yet irrevocably changed. When the dust finally settled, Sebastian stood alone amidst the wreckage of the empire he had helped destroy. The silence was deafening, the air still thick with smoke. "It's over," he whispered to no one in particular, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline and the aftermath. The room was empty now, save for the bodies of those who had once been his enemies. But what did it matter? The battle had been won, but at a steep price. As he walked through the wreckage, a bitter emptiness filled him. He had destroyed the empire, but in doing so had lost everything. Is this victory? He asked himself, but there was no answer. The city outside was silent, as if waiting for something that would never come. Sebastian stood at the threshold of a new world, but there was no one left to share it with. Only echoes of the past.